Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Welcome to The Print. I have with me today author Kingshuk Nag, and he has written a very timely book, which is now being discussed at all quarters and in all walks of life. Well, to first begin, he has written the book called A New Silk Road and the Geopolitics Between India and China in the Region. So it's a Rupa publication, and we are going to formally launch the book in the Print's soft cover program. But thank you so much. It's a congratulations. It's a wonderful book and very timely, as I said. So why don't we unveil this? If you can tell our viewers, what made you write the book? How much of a research have you done on this?
I actually first started writing the book way back in 2012.
Oh, okay.
And then I wrote a few, 2-3 chapters. And I met 2 publishers. Didn't tell them that I was writing the book, but I told them I knew the publishers from before. And I met them over lunch or something. I asked them, suppose I want to do a book on China. Suppose doing a book on China, will it interest you people? And both of them separately told me that it is bakwas, nobody is interested in China. Because in 2012, nobody was. But my interest was always on China because being a student of economics, I'd seen how the balance of trade between India and China was worsening, how all the raw materials from India were going to China, but the benefit was to the Chinese.
I understand.
So I wrote those 2 chapters or 3 chapters, but then it never progressed. And then in 2020, summers, I think I had gone to the office of a friend of mine who runs a website or something, and I wrote 2 pieces for him, and then copied those 2 pieces to many friends, including to Kapish Mehra of Rupa, and he immediately answered, "Ye to achhi kitab ban sakti hai."
That is good. That is good. So let us just now launch the book and show it to our viewers. This is the book, A New Silk Route, and India, China, and the Geopolitics of Asia. So you can get this. It's a Rupa publication book, and we are launching it in the soft cover. So, Kingshuk, if I can dive deep in the book, what interests me is the fact that how you have urged readers and even common man to sort of understand China's history, China's past, and quite, you've gone back to the Qing dynasty and others. But what you essentially say in the book is that to understand China's present actions, one has to really study how their past has been. So if you can share some light on that as well.
Because I started to write this book on China, but I myself had no clue about China. So I tried to study, and whatever came was of interest and whatever was useful, I read. And that is how the book was written. So it's not that before writing the book, I had a plan to write exactly these chapters. But as I was writing, I was trying to discover. And in the period of discovery, I realized that I must know about China. I must know about the geopolitics of China. I must know its history, because and why the Chinese are Chinese, and including the current president. Because I thought, as I've written in the book also, China and India are neighbors, but they are countries so distant that we know hardly anything about China. I, of course, visited China once in 2004. But when you go to China, you can't figure out what's happening. You want to go to the US, you go to the UK, you go to France, and also to Australia. These are all English-speaking areas, except for France. So you're familiar. But with China, you're not familiar at all. So that way, I would say, that's what you have to learn about China. It's not that if you're writing a book on UK, probably in Indian history, in your history classes in school, you would have learned a lot otherwise also. So about China, you have to really figure out what's China. So that way.
As you were saying that, your interest grew a long time back in China. You studied the economic and the trade relationship, which is still a concern for India even now, because the rising trade deficit, we keep seeing those figures. Once it had even touched $70 billion. But Has that always been the case? I mean, historically, if you see when India and China used to trade through the old Silk Route, and there were many other countries also at that point of time. Then we came under the British rule. So if you can shed some light on that as well.
I think the main thing about China to learn is that the Chinese hate Indians. And the Indians love Chinese. And this started from the time of Nehru. And Mr. Nehru believed that India and China had become comparable nations. China had become a republic India had become a republic in 1947 after getting independence. And China had also become a communist country in 1949. So they are comparable, and therefore they had common interests because they had been both dominated by the English. So he thought that they will become great friends. So he viewed Chinese with a lot of liberal language, but the Chinese used to hate India. Mao Zedong used to hate India because he thought that the British had colonized China and had used the help of Indians to do so. And in this context, there are two examples. One is the Opium Wars that took place in the 1842 to 1857. That Opium War was the Chinese said, don't bring this opium into India, into China. It did rule the Britishers. But they could do nothing because the Britishers are bringing opium into China. And why were they doing so? Because they didn't have anything else with which to buy the tea they wanted from China and silk and porcelain. So they brought opium because that used to opiate the people. And so they brought opium. But where did the opium come from? The opium came from India, from your Bengal, and from Madhya Pradesh. So, of course, Mr. Nehru would believe that India was under the colonial powers. So what the colonial powers did, India is not responsible for that. But Mao Zedong thinks that way. He said, you guys brought opium into China and spoiled our country. On top of this, after these opium wars, after some treaties, new ports were opened up. Shanghai port was opened up. And when Shanghai port was opened up, they wanted soldiers from, the British had introduced soldiers from India to look after Shanghai. Because getting soldiers from all the way from London is too difficult. So they wanted burly Indians from India to rule over or police over Shanghai. And the burly Indians came from Punjab. They were Sikhs. So that's why. And for these two reasons and also other reasons, Mr. Mao Zedong had a very, very poor opinion of India, unknown to Mr. Nehru. The Chinese belief was that India is an artificial country which has been brought together by the British, and very soon it will break down and partition. So that is what the Chinese view of India was. And Indian view, as you know, was very liberal. So that is the primary cause of conflict came, I think.
Right.
And over a period of time,
I think you dealt a lot on that. The first chapter that you've written, and that's very interesting, which is the shadows of mistrust. But do you think, if I can ask you, taking a cue from the past, that this shadow of mistrust is absolutely the main and probably the center point of the relationship right now in the bilateral ties between New Delhi and BJ?
Yeah, true. Because the Indians don't trust the Chinese, and the Chinese also don't trust the Indians. Chinese are very practical people, so they want India for whatever good India can do to them. And number one is the English language, because the China wants to expand its commercial empire across the globe, and they think that knowledge of English is going to be a prime importance. And they know that the Indians know English very well. So they invite Indian companies. They have got Indian people working there because they need people knowing English. So that's why English is their window to the world. And who will help you to man that window? The Indians. Because the same people, if you hire from UK and US, will be much more costlier. So the Indians will do that job. So Indians are really welcome there. If you go to China, which you might have, then you'll find that the Chinese really welcome the Indians. and there's nothing, no antagonism as such in that sense.
Right. Also, when you talk about, decoding the Chinese adventurism, and there is a lot of similarity that you find, and there've been, I've read this in other books, but in your book, you sort of go deep inside the fact that how there is an uncanny resemblance or probably a similarity between Chairman Mao and President Xi Jinping. Would you like to elaborate on that and their vision for the country?
I think Mao was the original leader, and then you came into other practical leaders like Deng, and then it was followed by some other chaps whose name also I can't go to remember. But they were much weaker leaders. And for the first time, you've got this chap called Zai, or whatever his name is. Xi Jinping, is that the name? Yeah. So I think he's a guy who's very ambitious, and he's on the footsteps of Mao, if you say. And I've written a chapter on his own background, which will show that how he has been brought up in the system, though he has, and so he is, now he wants to be the real boss of the nation, and he's the boss, but he wants to rule China for God knows how many years. And so he wants to do, and a lot of, he himself had to undergo a lot of trouble in life, younger life, but that has not made him more humane. In fact, he has become he's become part of the system, so he behaves exactly the way he's supposed to behave. Not like a human. He's lost his humanness, we can say. So
right. But also the fact that, how we've seen in the case of President Xi Jinping, there is this plans, that huge mega plans, connectivity and infrastructure plans that he has, and which you have quite rightly mentioned in a greater details in your chapters regarding the One Belt, One Road initiative. And also the fact that how these are ways in which China probably, has started influence India's neighbors. You've talked a great deal on Nepal and other neighbors. But I would like you to tell our viewers what exactly were your findings, and while you were writing the book and interviewing many people, what are some of the insights that you got?
The major insight is that all of us knew from it for a long, long time that India is surrounding a lot of small neighbors, and those small neighbors don't love you. Everybody knows that. You have differences with Sri Lanka, you have differences with Pakistan, that is of course well known. Even the Bangladeshis don't love you, and even the Nepalis don't love you. So that is exactly which came out. The Chinese also came to know of this, and they wanted to use that for their own purposes. And therefore today, except for Bangladesh, where the Prime Minister of Bangladesh is probably sort of close to the Indians, even the other members of the Bangladesh government are not. And Nepal, as you know, had turned up against India, and they conquered 2 areas which were claimed by Indians, Lipu Lake and whatever that is. So Pakistan, of course, we know. And Sri Lanka, very suspicious of India. Even Burma is now on their line. The major fact is that even if they like you or not like you, the question is, in today's world, the money rules. So if I'm short of cash as a country, and if some other country comes like China and gives us money to help us, then I'll be a China, not with India. No? That's the problem.
But do you think it is always the case, with China, the case is always about money and having deep pockets? Or is it also about ideology when it comes to, as you were saying, influencing our neighbors and letting them sort of drift away from India a bit? And if that is the case, I mean, you being a journalist for so many number of years, I'm sure you would know what are the lackings that probably India has compared to China. And I'm saying not just the money factor, but also the ideological and other aspects of it.
China is a closed country. It's got an ideology. The first thing the Chinese did was, and this is not written in the book, What thing the Chinese did was to conquer its own people. So there's a central Chinese ideology, and there are no newspapers, open newspapers and TV channels and radio. So what the people of China are thinking, we don't know. Is the official view of China, which comes from the Communist Party of China, that's what we know. But India is not a country like that. In India, there are multiple voices which all come out. India is a democracy, and all these things come out. And I think that is it. So China is a homogeneous country which is out to conquer the world in the sense, and then it wants to also beat India because India is a large neighbor. So if the Chinese want to be sovereign in this part of the world, then it must get India under its thumb. That's exactly what they're trying. And India is a wonderful market also. So they want to sell their goods, goods also here. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening. And India has never been a planned country like that. I mean, our strategies are not a maneuvering strategy, but the Chinese, of course, have got maneuvering strategies. So from the very beginning, from Nehru's time, only made a mistake of thinking China was our friend. But the Chinese never thought so. Because Hindi Chinese, Chini Bhai Bhai was the signal, what was said by the Indian government, from the Nehru government. But I don't think they said China, India friends. I don't think this.
Also, Kingshuk, in your book, you have written a great deal on the 1962 war and its legacy. And the most interesting aspect that I found in that chapter is about a certain report that the CIA had given on the Chinese plans to India's Foreign Secretary, Mr. Subimal Dutt at that time, and how, effectively Prime Minister Nehru was warned in 1958 about their strategic moves. So what are some of the, interesting aspects of that you can share with us? And I'm sure when the readers read the book, they'll get to know more. But what are some of the key highlights from there that you will tell us?
That is what I think. Which is something which I can't really understand. Maybe it will require another book to understand why Mr. Nehru was so complacent about the Chinese. Even though he was getting warnings, including from his foreign secretary and other people. The only explanation that I can think of right now is that V.K. Krishna Menon, who was a communist originally, was able to convince Nehru there's nothing wrong going on. But it is really a shortage of the understanding of Mr. Nehru. That is exactly why, after losing the 62 war, I think Mr. Nehru had a heart attack and passed away in 64. He was unable to see the national interest. And why it happened, that is something we don't happen, which I don't understand still. Why did he not see the national interest? Unless he was trying to woo Mr. Mao so much. Why? Because at that time, India and China were comparable. Today, China may be a more powerful country, but in those days, India and China. And why did he give an entry to the Chinese into the UN? Also, we don't know. And at that time, you'll see in the books, there were articles being written in the Western press where they were asking India to assert their right. So why Mr. Nehru did so, I do not know at this point of time. But let me promise you, one day you shall know.
Well, that's interesting. But do you think we have learned a lesson from that? Okay, according to you, the mistakes that Prime Minister Nehru has done, do you think Prime Minister Modi is trying to correct those mistakes if you come back, if you come ahead with the Ladakh standoff that is still ongoing, although the disengagement has started, the first phase is over. But do you think that kind of a situation can arise at any point of time? This time we heard the Foreign Secretary Harsh Shringla saying that, the Galwan clash almost, made these two countries come on the verge of a 1962 kind of a situation. Yes, we've been able to avoid that kind of a situation now, but do you think those threats that were there way past in 62 still remain in 2020, 2021? And going forward, do you think the steps that India has taken under Prime Minister Modi, probably that is the way to tell the Chinese that this far and no further?
No, not exactly. If you go back to Modi's history, and this part I have not written in this book, but I have written in some other book. I wrote on Mr. Modi. I wrote a biography of Mr. Modi. in that book, there's a chapter called The Chinese Connection.
Mm-hmm.
That is, in that chapter itself, I saw him as Chief Minister of Gujarat being very pally with the Chinese. And I said that probably this is going to be a cause of problem for him.
You wrote it in that the Namo story, right? The earlier book of yours.
Yeah. So basic point is that Mr. Modi also started his political life being soft towards China. Probably he thought that he can gain a lot from China. But now he must have learned his lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So he's trying to reorient his strategy, I think. And even in those, and also in Nehru's time, the problem with China was only their military might and other things, and there was no problem regarding their economic wealth. Today, as I said, the Chinese are dominating India because our balance of trade with China is so adverse. And unfortunately, this aspect has been not ignored, or rather, this aspect has been supported by the Indian businessmen who love to go to China and who will say China is such a wonderful country. Even now, you'll find people like Rajiv Bajaj, the son of Rahul Bajaj, who runs Bajaj Auto, saying, no, we get goods from there at a cheap price. So this is what your country's thinking is not aligned with the reality. The country's economic thinking is not aligned with the reality. And today, a lot of businessmen, and today, if that day, I will find a toaster in my house I bought a toaster. This incident is given in the book, though I have renamed myself and said Mr. Palash, which is another way of saying King Shivani. So I bought a toaster, a brilliant toaster, and I come home and it's made by TTK, made in India. But then I started using, there was some problem. Therefore, I started checking that toaster and found it made in China. So today, in every Indian household, there are goods, Chinese made, your pen is. Even I was, some years ago, I was unwell and I was in Apollo Hospital. And I was made to lie down on a cot which was not broad enough. So I asked the director who came to see me, where did you get this? So he confessed to me that he had imported from China. So all sorts of things you are importing from China, whether it is hospital beds, with even pins and even Kutch handicrafts, kites from Kutch, multicolored kites we are also importing from there. So basically the Chinese are dominating in India. Today you don't realize most of the things that you are using, you are thinking that they are Indians, but they are not. The Chinese, you see Vivo, you see all the cell companies. Today, all the cell companies, we are using cell phones, but most of them are this Chinese cell phones, whatever the name, Vivo and whatever. Until last year, they were also the major sponsors of the IPL cricket. So the Chinese are actually in a very, very devious way gaining control over our country. And that control need not be over this warfare or a fighting.
Right.
This warfare, of course, has been due to a different reason, which I can say later if you want to.
Mm-hmm. But keeping that exactly in mind, exactly what you are saying, the Modi government had restricted FDIs, the foreign direct investment from China. We saw the huge banning of apps, and there are other several measures taken due to the Ladakh standoff, although the restriction on FDI happened a little before that. But do you think these are steps in the right direction? Will that in the longer run address the concerns, that you are talking about, maybe mitigated going forward?
National sovereignty of the country comes first. So I think Mr. Modi has to do that. So whatever he has done, I will say it's fine. So that way. And just because private property... I couldn't get your question, last question.
You think more needs to be done?
Yeah, over a period of time. We have also to realize that we have also become totally dependent on China. So we can't pull the rug and say this, and I will not import this product or that product, because we are getting drugs, pharmaceuticals, steel products. So this dependence has gone over the last 10 years or 15 years, 10 or 15 years. So we have to strategically get away from there. Otherwise, we'll be in trouble. But this can't be done in one day. You can't say there's a war today or okay, I'll stop all. All. So that is not possible. It has to be done periodically. It has to be done over a period of time. But we must have that in mind clearly. If China is not our friend, we can't trust them. We have to be very careful of them, what goods we get here. But a businessman will not take them. He'll say what is the gain to be now is going to be the gain to be tomorrow also. So that's the point.
But according to you, what do you think could be, the effective steps that the Indian government can take, the present government or maybe the future governments, in order to sort of restrict this kind of huge dependence that India has on Chinese products? I mean, we are even dependent on Chinese APIs for our pharmaceutical production. And also the fact that, certain steps that have been taken in terms of India being a key member in the Indo-Pacific Strategic Initiative. India is now a member of the Quad, and you have dealt with Quad to a very large extent in your book. Do you think also this is going to help and give an indication to the Chinese that the fact that, India is also changing, like it or not? I mean, yes, we will remain neighbors. We cannot change geography. But at least Chinese are getting the signal that the Indians are changing, and they probably cannot be taken for a ride anymore.
About China, one thing we have to notice is this CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is a major cause for trouble to us. Because Pakistan is not a country with whom we have very great relations. Now today, as a result of Chinese initiatives, a country like Pakistan is totally becoming under the control of China. They'll get a lot of stuff from China. So today we had one enemy called China. Now that will be, and China and Pakistan will be together. And Pakistan has got a much better knowledge of India than China. And I think that Pakistanis will also egg on the Chinese. And I think this controversy about Ladakh has got much more to do with this angle, because they are making a road which will go up from Gwadar port up to China, which will pass through and very close to India. It will pass through occupied Pakistan. So that's the interest. And Pakistanis can also tell the Chinese a lot of things about India, which the Chinese don't know. Pakistanis can tell the Chinese. Also, they can give a lot of other insights. For instance, today we have got problems with Kashmir, but we don't have any problems with Junagadh, which is a district in Gujarat. But Junagadh, Nawabad also did not want to merge with India, so he had to be virtually kicked out of India. Now today, that chap ran away, and his grandson is there. He is raised that Junagadh should be an independent country. He stays in Pakistan, and the Pakistan government has opened a department of Junagadh. Tomorrow, what prevents Pakistan from creating a controversy in Junagadh? Junagadh is only a state, so these sort of things will be there. And because the Chinese are with the Pakistanis will think now we can raise these subjects. So the strategic intelligence will come from the Pakistanis, and the strength will come from the Chinese. Do you get my point?
Right.
I was saying that all the intelligence about India will come from Pakistan, and that will benefit the Chinese. And as I was saying, this warfare in Ladakh is only due to Pakistan, because that area they want to make free. So that's why the fight. Otherwise, why have they not touched Ladakh for so many years, for 50 years? Why suddenly? So there's a Pakistani interest there.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed I started the book by saying how there was originally a plan during the time of the Sikh emperors to have a route from Tibet to Afghanistan to take the Pashmina wool trade. Maybe today there's no Pashmina wool, but they want the whole area to be free, the Chinese. And that will further the trade interests. And that is all why this war is over.
So my next question to you will be, as you rightly mentioned on the Ladakh factor. Now, the fact that, in 2019, after the abrogation of Article 370, we heard Home Minister Amit Shah talking, giving a statement on the floor of the parliament that India can, Aksai Chin is a part of India and India will be able to, gain control of that. Do you think these statements help towards, in the sense, giving a signal to both Pakistan as well as China? And also, how do you see some of the measures like India joining Quad?
I think when Amit Shah made that statement, I was not at all worried, because these sort of statements politicians always make in the Indian Parliament. I saw nothing unexceptional in that. However, the Chinese picked on the statement and made it big, because the Chinese culture is also different. Chinese are not Indians. Indians speak like this. Chinese go goal, as they say. And that is what I've written in one chapter also. When you're in a meeting, the Chinese can't easily say no. And therefore, he has to say maybe, okay, I'll see, we'll see. So their language is different and our language is different. We are more in ours, which is a fact. So probably the Chinese would have said in a different way. So if from the Chinese prism, you look at the Indian, what the statements coming from India, the interpretation would be different and vice versa. So that is how they interpreted what Amit Shah said. And what do you say? Amit Shah was the Home Minister of the country. Would you expect him to stand and say Aksai Chin is not part of India? Of course it is part of India, because it was till 1962 part of India. We are not given up our claims on that part. Huh? Mm-hmm. So there is nothing wrong with what he said. And of course, Article 370 abrogation, whether it should have been abrogated or not, is a question of domestic politics.
Absolutely.
But it is in so whether we abrogate or not, what's your problem? What's anybody's
problem? Right.
Of India, na?
Mm-hmm. So do you think, how do you see the future of the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor? India has, and India is very much firm on the fact that it does not support that. India is also not part of the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. But do you see this CPEC becoming a future bone of contention, and it can one day flare up?
Yeah, it can be a problem with Pakistan itself, because today all the money is being given by Pakistan by China to build that road, and they are also promising all sorts of industries will come around that road. So it will seem that it is of great benefit to the Pakistani people. But even as analysts in Pakistan are today questioning, the Chinese are also not seen as very, very humane people and very people who will donate money. But today they are giving you money, tomorrow they will extract that. So if a bill to Pakistan to say that, look, we have built an industry, or they will not probably give a direct bill, but they will want more and more concessions. So that will not work out to the benefit of India. So it will be a great problem for India. So the CPEC is certainly not something India has, and I don't know how India can do anything to that, because the road is passing through Pakistan. Mm-hmm. And there are some domestic problems in Pakistan, the CPEC will remain. Correct? What do you say? You agree with me?
I agree in the sense that, yes, this is becoming an issue where both sides will now have to, I think the three countries need to have a discussion as to the fact that India is strongly opposed to CPEC. But again, coming to one of your other chapters, which I have not really seen many other authors writing about when they talk about India-China, is the Indian Ocean Blues. And that's what I was going to ask you, that India is now very much part, and it has its own Indo-Pacific strategy, which it tries to, as Prime Minister Modi has said, that this is an inclusive, free and open zone where there'll be freedom of navigation. And then India is now part of the Quad also. The Malabar exercise has happened between the Quad countries. How do you see that dynamic sort of shaping up when it comes to the Indian Ocean strategy vis-a-vis India's relationship with China?
Because China supposedly should not be part of Indian Ocean, because they are far from the Indian Ocean. So our relation with China should be on the Himalayas. But now these fellows are coming here And because they want to become a global power. China today doesn't want to remain as an Asian power or local power. They want to be a global power. Therefore, they want, so a lot of countries are also facing the heat. So USA, Japan, Australia, and India should be together in this. And this Indian Ocean, I'm not saying that Indian Ocean belongs to us, but it is in our neighborhood. The name is, of course, also Indian. So obviously, we have a bigger stake. And our development plans also have. So there are a lot of little states. So we can't understand what is China doing here. But it is there. But today we must understand that China is wanting this way in this ocean to reach other countries and also influence them. So we have to curtail them here. And that is why I think what we are trying to do. It's too early years because they want to use even small countries like Mauritius or Seychelles or even Maldives to set up military camps. So this is not going to be something which is be of great, what should I say, a great liking to India. Because if we don't do anything today, 20 years later, they'll become very, very strong. So it is time that we stop them now. We should contain them. We can't, of course, say don't use this ocean. So we have to take steps to contain them. And that's what we are trying to do, I think. The government, of course, has tried to do that. Also, because the US was also very much concerned.
So do you think, going forward in the next 10, 20 years, what should be India's approach now that India has, taken a lot of lesson, I believe, be it the 1962 war, be it the Galwan clash in June 2020. What do you think India's approach should be when it comes to China and also when it comes to dealing with its neighbors, because neighbors are now getting closer to China, as you said. Prime Minister Modi has a neighborhood first policy. We are again looking at building ties with China, after the disengagement takes place. There is also a talk going on that maybe the boundary agreements now have to be revisited. So what is your viewpoint? And that will be essentially my last question to you. How do you see India's relationship with China going forward, and including the seas and the neighborhood?
I don't know how India's relation with China will go, but if you really ask me, I would ask for a hawkish posture. I'll tell you that today, India and China are opposite each other because of two states. One is Tibet and other is Xinjiang. Tibet is certainly not part of China, which they are occupying. And that Xinjiang province is full of Muslims and other people who are being tortured by the Chinese. So these two states we must take some measures, maybe intelligence measures, anything, to ensure that Chinese influence in these areas reduce. And our long-term aim should be to ensure that these two states are no longer part of China. So China will become a much smaller country. A lot of their wealth will go away also. And India will not be facing China over the Himalayas also. If you really ask me, this is what should be done. We can't take this soft approach. Just ensure that Tibet is not part of China. We should start saying so loudly. And the Xinjiang province is also not part of China, where the Chinese are trying to have a lot of harass the people. So these two angles we must raise at the international fora and other places. And therefore, our long-term aim should be to take these two states out of China. If that happens, China will become 60% of what it is in land mass. Now, more importantly, India will not face China.
So basically, you're advocating revisiting the one China policy. And when you talk about a hawkish posture, I'm sorry, what exactly do you mean by that?
I don't know what I'll say in that sense. Posturing should be hawkish. In the end, how do you do separate that? I don't know. But today we must tell the world that we know that Tibet is not your part. Okay. And Xinjiang is also not part of your country. At least let's start with saying so. Later how things will develop, we don't know. But we must take a very strong posture. And then number 3, we must reduce our economic dependence on China.
Right.
None of them can be done in 2 days, but over a period of 10 years, probably it can be done.
Sure. You're saying that should be the long-term vision between India-China policy. Sure. Thank you so much, Kinshuk. That has been very helpful. For the benefit of our viewers, here's the book once again. A New Silk Route. It is a Rupa publication, and you are watching this discussion on the print soft cover. Thank you so much. All the best for the book. You take care.